Hello.
Yo!
Ruined my intro just because I have a delay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Theologaming, where we nearly got a professional start in for once, but then, no, it just wasn't going to happen. Um, so today we're going to be... Oh, I always forget my order for these things. I'm a very organized person, surely. Um, with me here today we have Jacob,
G'day.
Adam,
Hi.
Josh, Joel. I don't even know. I don't even know the
didn't realize
people
we
on my
had
own show.
another person.
It's not like he hasn't had a while to learn my name, I think. Oh dear.
It doesn't. I'm like reading down the list in our team speak, and it's like, okay, Lyle Shelton, who's that? Four-letter word, J, Josh. Oh wait.
You've known me for how long, man?
Why
Oh
don't?
dear.
And also we have our newest member, Reggie,
Meow. Hey.
who I got her name right despite only knowing her for about 2 weeks. So yeah.
Yep.
And today,
You got it right. Fine.
today we are discussing politics pretty much and what things should affect specifically Christian values on voting, though with secular and atheist perspectives as well. And if you are watching, well, both of them have it up at the moment, but we're going to start this by discussing a checklist that you may have seen come out, if you're Australian, lately, which is the Christian Values Checklist by the Australian Christian Values something, like organisation or something.
Christian, yeah,
Institute.
Christian.
Institute.
Australian Christian Values Institute.
Cool. I checked
Promoting
it
our
before.
Australian values.
Yeah.
And this is set to, a glorious sun with the Australian flag and some clouds.
Yep.
Really optimistic stuff.
It's like Christian
Yep.
stock art with a I won't rag on their thing. I mean, ours is nothing special.
It's exactly the kind of thing that you want to introduce a platform consisting of like systematic human rights violations or something like that. I mean, maybe it's not quite that bad, but it's pretty bad, right? It's pretty bad.
We'll get to that.
Yeah. I'll get to that right now, pretty much. So, yeah, normally, well, I try to make sure that when choosing who to bring on this show and what the topics and so forth I do try to get like a balanced perspective on things. People who, I've got to stop idly scrolling. We are, now I've messed everything up. We're good now.
Yes,
Yes.
so instead you idly highlight.
It's true. I'll just click it. I'll idly highlight windows that no one can see. So yeah, I try to make sure that this is a fairly balanced platform with people with several different perspectives on the issue, so we get a good discussion going and several different sides of the argument. And just wanted to say that we are somewhat lacking in that this time, in that I'm pretty sure all of us are not terribly far right or right wing politics, I guess. I'm not sure
Yeah,
which
sorry
one
guys,
it
we
is.
have no Nazis on the show. It's,
I got one right next to me.
I got a couple, but they're like tied up in the trunk, so I didn't really want to invite them on the show. But yeah,
So you
whatever it's
apologize
called.
for a lack of balance and then claim to have Nazis in your trunk. But you didn't invite them on.
Well, yeah. I mean, we got to have the right balance of all the right opinions. That's how these things work, right?
Oh, it's
And
so
now-
terrible.
And now you're North Korea. Alright.
Just it's a teaser for next week's topic? Probably next week's. The next few weeks' topics will be a bit awkward. Also now, playing around in other windows and it keeps making the other one flash.
We'll play Wolfenstein next week.
That wouldn't be a bad game if I had it.
It's a
Maybe.
good game.
I have heard it's got cool stuff in it. But anyway, we are like 10 minutes into this now, I think. Yes, this is a less balanced than normal perspective because we mostly agree on this issue. And you will soon find that out as we tear apart the Christian values checklist.
Spoilers.
So yeah, we'll start this. Let's just go down the list. So how this is going to work is we're going to sort of talk through these lists, whether we think this is something we can care about or what our opinion on this is, whether it's even a Christian thing to care about, so forth. And then at the end we will postulate some values that we think are things you should think about going into election as Christians, and Adam and Reggie might have some of their own to add. So, the first point on the Christian values checklist that should apparently shape your voting in Australia is continue to open Parliament each day with Christian prayer. Now, I'm not fully sure if they intended this to be ranked, but putting this at number 1 spot I think is a poor move right from the start.
No, our nation is in shambles. It's all because the Christian prayer in Parliament has been attacked.
It's the only reason our nation is not currently like overridden by demons, and by demons I mean homosexuals. Yeah, so
I
let's
mean, you
ignore
joke,
that.
but there are people who reckon that, right?
I know, half this list will be homosexual marriage. And we're not going to discuss that too much here. That deserves an episode of its own at some point. But that's definitely going to come up here, so what do we think about the importance of continuing to open Parliament each day with Christian prayer? Oh, and I'll be playing Total War Warhammer in the background now. So,
Nice and
copyright and
appropriate,
stuff.
yeah. I get from a historical point of view that's a thing that's been done lots in the past, and so as a tradition, people see that as a good thing. And I get that for Christians, it's obviously like a real good thing. But we've got a lot of other religions in Australia. How must that make those people feel about? I mean, Adam and Reggie, you guys can probably speak more to this than I can. But for you, what does it make you feel as people who aren't Christians to have Christian prayer being, performed by our government that's meant to represent the whole country?
Well, I feel the government should be. Sorry, Reggie. It should be.
I was just going to say, do you want to go first?
Sure. It should be, secular in this matter, and it is quite exclusionary given, the increasing diversity of, Australia as a cultural melting pot. And I don't think having the government of Australia have start each day with Christian prayer is, suiting that.
Yeah, I believe in the separation of church and state, or any religion and state. This is an interesting thing, though, because like the founding fathers of the US actually valued religious diversity, and they wanted all religions to be acknowledged and people to be aware of all of them. But I feel like, yeah, opening every day with a Christian prayer is complete disregard for anyone who's not Christian or other, basically atheists or people of other religions. I would say no.
See, my perspective is just that it's rather pointless. I mean, like, this isn't a commentary on prayer, but our government is not made up of Christians. Sure, there's Christians in there, but it's a secular government, and large numbers of the people in it, I think, would be atheist or at least secular in their views. like prayer isn't a ritual that you do at the start of your day to make sure that things turn out right. It's like dialogue with God for like the main thing here, I suppose, is for guidance and for strength as you continue to do that in the day. And what is being achieved by this prayer for our government? It's just like, why is this a big issue if we want to get rid of it?
Personally, I'm okay with it being there. I mean, I'm not obviously. I don't think it's like everyone says, it's not the most important issue there. However, obviously, with separation of church and state, there's absolutely no obligation for it as a Christian for it to be there. Like, it's not like if it got removed, it's not an attack on Christianity. We're not going to do this because we don't do this. It's not an attack on anyone by not praying. So I don't if they decide not to do it. Yeah. Not my view on it.
The thing that disappoints me most about it too with this list is that it's the top thing. Like, it mightn't be a ranked list, but when your number one point is something so trivial and something that's not really of any huge benefit to the nation or the people, it's like, I mean, that's my main argument with this whole list.
But the thing is, the people who've made the list obviously believe that it is. They reckon prayer's an important thing and it's a powerful thing, and so it's important for Australia that our government is acknowledging God in the way they're doing stuff. I'm not saying they're right, but that's the reasoning behind it.
I actually am probably not as aggressive against this list as you guys. Like, again, I'm not saying I agree with it, everything on there, but I found it actually informative to see what people's views were on different things. That doesn't mean like that ticks necessarily good things and crosses necessarily bad things. It's interesting to know what the different parties kind of are on about. You know what I mean? So I found it informative, not decision changing. Does that make sense? I'm not as aggressive against it, at least for my own information.
And I mean, I'm not like, there's stuff on the list that I do agree with, but the things that are missing off the list is what really gets to me. Like, the focus of the list is all wrong, even if some of the things on it are decent. It's missing things that I reckon are far more important to care about as Christians than the things that did make the list. But anyway,
Do you want to go through that after we play through them all?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We'll just move on to the next point now. So, point number 2. Protect marriage and the future of our children. Reject homosexual marriage. And let's link a few of these together, because there's a lot of these that when the plane goes away.
Sorry about the plane, guys.
Yeah, so several of these are about homosexual marriage. So point number 2 is obviously just protect marriage and the future of our children, reject homosexual marriage, so cover all. 3, support a plebiscite on marriage. So
the
that's
referendum.
Yeah, so that's taking the vote to the public to make the choice on whether we want gay marriage or not, rather than have it decided by the government or the courts and then imposed.
I feel like that might go against their interests. Well, at least most of the young population, and even some of the older population, are pro-gay marriage.
Yeah,
I think referendum is pretty fair. It's actually pretty fair though. Everyone gets to have a vote, have a say.
Yeah, I definitely reckon that's the way we should do it, and I'm pretty disappointed that a lot of people aren't wanting to do that.
Okay, I'm going to argue with you on this one because it's a stalling tactic. If a vote was put to Parliament today, it's likely that Parliament would pass an amendment to the Marriage Act that changes the definition of marriage to no longer be restricted to one man and one woman. We didn't need a plebiscite, we didn't need a referendum, we didn't need a popular vote in 2004, whenever it was that John Howard wrote heterosexuality into the Marriage Act. So why do we need it now to take that change out? It's just a stalling tactic. People want to push it as long as possible in some vain hope that, you know, if we take it to the public, maybe there's a secret majority of people who are actually against this. Also, even if we have the plebiscite vote, there's nothing that binds Parliament to vote accordingly. It still ends up going to Parliament. They're just informed with a, you know, more expensive, more comprehensive opinion poll as to what people want. They still vote according to their consciences. So if it wouldn't pass Parliament without a plebiscite, it's not going to pass Parliament with a plebiscite. It adds nothing to the situation. It just means that we're waiting until after the election before we decide to recognise some people's relationships, which is just, it's pointless. And those people are, like, you know, being treated as second-class citizens while they wait. What's the point of it?
Well, when you're trying to overturn a social institution that's been running since humanity has been around, I think you should at least ask your people.
The thing is, though, is that we've already made changes to this thing. When Howard changed it back in 2004, the Marriage Act didn't specify that marriage was between one man, one woman, and the Liberal government then wrote that into the Marriage Act. If that hadn't been done, then states would now be able to, as some states already have, make their own decisions about that. You know, I think Tasmania, ACT, and some other places have already moved to legalise same-sex marriage in their state laws, but those laws aren't valid Australia-wide because we still have discrimination written into the Marriage Act since Howard changed it. So all we want to do is undo that change, and people are going, no, we need to take that to a popular vote. Why? Why? If you didn't need a popular vote to write that in, then why do you need a popular vote to take it back out?
Well, that didn't need to be written in before that. Before that, homosexuality is a really new thing, and like homosexual marriage, this whole desire for that to be a thing is new. Before, marriage was man and a woman. Normally one, they're not exclusively, but always a man and a woman together. So that specification then became needed.
I mean, I guess the bottom line is that it's the responsibility of the government to make laws governing marriage, and we haven't had plebiscites in the past for changes to the Marriage Act. So what makes this so different? Why is it worth the expense? I mean, the government could vote.
I think it's just to end all the arguing. It's just okay, you know what, like you mentioned earlier, it's just the pushing backwards and forwards. Is you know what, we're fed up with this debate being a debate, let's just end it.
It's not going to end, though. That's the thing. If a plebiscite turns out that the majority of Australians support same-sex marriage, which it will, you'll still have people campaigning against it. It's just that, you know, people aren't going to go, oh, okay, everyone wants this, so I'm going to stop saying it shouldn't be a thing. No, the Christian lobby and groups like that are still going to ramp up their anti-gay rhetoric, and they're still going to campaign against this. That a plebiscite doesn't change anything. It's just, like I said before, it's just a more expensive, more comprehensive opinion poll.
At least they will have had a say on that and lost, though, rather than, instead of breeding resentment against government and country, it's more, well, we've got to change people's minds now or something like that. Like, our entire government is based on people having a say. Like, we make our laws, we vote for our government.
You have a say in things like this. You have a say in things like this by going to your local MP and saying, this is what I think. You have a say in this by writing to your senator and saying, this is what I think. You already have the opportunity opportunity to have your voice heard by the representatives that you've elected. And I don't know if you remember, but last year when there was a lot of activity surrounding this idea of, hey, let's get a marriage equality bill on the table, and there was a bipartisan effort to make that happen. There are a number of MPs that actually polled their constituents and sent out surveys to people and said, hey, get in touch with us, let us know what you want to see. Do you want this change to happen, or do you not want it to happen? I mean, politicians are already, good politicians at least, are already switched on, are already engaging with their constituents, going, hey, what do you guys want? And voting accordingly. If you want your voice to be heard in Parliament, then talk to your MP. We don't need a plebiscite. We have representatives. It's their job.
All right. So, did you have something to say, Reggie?
Oh, no, I'm just going to say those are some really good.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
yeah, they are. So let's leave it there and move on to... Well, I mean, we're a discussion channel. It's not like we sit here and argue all night until one side concedes defeat. Else we'd get nothing done in a show.
You did want to have a whole episode about that, didn't you?
Yeah, I know. No, we stayed on topic. We just discussed plebiscite. We're going well. Safe Schools Coalition, teaching radical gender and sexual ideology.
I mean, the whole idea of that is it's like looking after students, making sure that they're respected and that sort of thing. I've seen what anti-gay bullying does to kids in school. I've been on the receiving end of stuff like that in the past. It's not pleasant. Anything that makes kids less likely to experience prejudice because of their identity is a good thing.
One argument that I saw someone bring up on Facebook was, against this, was that they want to teach us at primary school level, and kids that age won't understand the complexities of these issues. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I thought that was an interesting opinion concerning the whole safe schools and teaching of transgender identities and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, I guess as a counterpoint to that, it's, you have to be introduced to it somewhere. I know that growing up, I didn't have an introduction to any LGBTI issues. Like, parents didn't discuss it with me, and so it was, I just kind of collected things, I guess, piecemeal. Like, I saw this bit on the news, or this conversation with a friend, and the Safe Schools Coalition, teaching kids from a young age that, you don't need to go into graphic detail. You just say that, it's all people are different, and that's okay.
I think that's a big point, is that it has to be age appropriate and very much, I guess, not overloaded for the age group of the kittens.
You don't have to go into graphic detail, though, to express these ideas. I mean, all you got to say is, hey, some guys like guys, some girls like girls, and I mean,
some people love everyone.
Yeah. But the thing is that for these folk who've made up this checklist, it's not okay to tell kids that. And for a lot of people who claim a Christian worldview, it's not okay to tell people that. So I don't know. I don't know how to respond to that aside from changing people's minds.
Well, I mean, the word radical here in this point isn't very
well defined.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's clear what they're using the word radical for. Because, I mean, for instance, point number 1, continue to open Parliament each day with Christian prayer. There's not much in the way of adjectives in there. It's just, we want to continue to open the Parliament with Christian prayer. But here, you're saying, we want to oppose this thing which we're deeming radical. It's not just oppose Safe Schools Coalition. teaching gender and sexual ideology. Even the word ideology is makes it seem like it's something foreign, like we're trying to thrust it on our kids and convert them to something.
Well, that is a way you can view this. And there's, I mean, you don't have to be religious to have radicals. I think there's plenty out there that, like, for example, you've got radical environmentalists and so forth, but I think there's also, like, radicals who would like, I can't think of a good way to say this without making it sound like the gays are out to convert us all. But, like, I think you can get what I'm saying in that people don't want to just stop at some guys like guys and that's okay. It's like some guys like guys and, you know, it's even better in some ways than other relationships. You should try it. And
I don't think.
I mean, the focus of safe schools and things like that is not on encouraging people to experiment with their sexuality. I suppose it's not discouraging people from doing that either, but the main point is teaching people to be respectful of others, whatever they happen to identify as.
I think that's a
Respect
really
and
important one.
understanding.
I think the aim of it being respecting other people and being willing to learn is really important. I think that's the core of it. When it becomes a more, I guess, forward teaching method, then that's when it's kind of I kind of have issues with it. You know what I mean? Like if it's just, hey, we're here to help, here, like, you know, help you get information you need and understand, and obviously, very much encourage people respecting everyone regardless of what they may live like. I think that's pretty good. No, that's exactly safe skills though. I'm not an expert on that.
And I mean, I guess to be clear here, it's more beyond just, you know, respecting and understanding. We're talking about, in the case of trans people, they're some of the most vulnerable people to, say, suicide. And, you know, so this program could, you know, teaching children from an early age that, you know, this is okay, that people, again, are different, and, you know, we should respect and understand that. You know, that could go a long way to alleviating this sort of thing down the track.
The flip side
or
of
it
this,
can
though,
get more
is
people thinking being trans is okay, and that just because they like the color pink instead of blue, they're actually a girl and should change, and then end up committing suicide because they made a mistake. Like
No,
I
that's
think
stupid
that's
because that's like enforcing gender
oversimplification.
stereotypes.
Well,
Sorry.
that sort of thing happens though. When we have gender stereotypes, and we always will, because we'll always have stereotypes, then you're going to get in situations where people think that, oh, they're actually trans because they don't like the expected thing. And I mean, we've already seen this with parents like, oh, I'm going to raise my kid as a girl because they thought, oh, hey, I should be a girl, when they're a kid and they don't even have a concept of sexuality and the minds don't even differ yet because it's hormones that do that. Because, like, that's the sort of thing that this worries me about these sort of programs. If you start it in high school in like a, well, whatever you want to call it, those life skills programs or the general HPE or what it was called now, is where you do that. So sure, you've got a better idea of that by high school, or at least mid-high school. You understand a bit of sexuality, sexual desire, and what it means, but children don't even have that yet. To do that, you're just muddying waters that don't need to be muddied.
We should just be careful not to trivialize things, because I'm sure, I mean, I don't have any statistics, but I guess that there could be individuals who are confused on the matter. For every one of those, I imagine there are many more individuals who this is a reality for them. It's not a confusion, and I don't think we should be using the I mean, can I use the term, is it straw man appropriate for this? Like it seems like an oversimplification of a very, very complex problem to say, take a simple case and use it to just how you think about these issues.
I think it's definitely an oversimplification. Looking back at it, I really liked how my school introduced these issues to us all. So in grade 7, so we all started high school, that's when everyone started going through puberty and stuff like that, we were introduced to LGBTIQ people. We mostly focused on the LG people, like trans wasn't mentioned as much, but I think that was a great time for us to discuss it, like the teachers encouraged open discussion with it. And then later on in high school, my school even organized like seminars that students could go to if they wanted to about LGBTIQ people, safe spaces, people to talk to and stuff like that. And I think that's pretty good as it is. And like from what I understand about this Safe Schools Coalition thing is I don't know if they want to undo all that infrastructure we already have to support LGBT people.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that they don't. The whole idea is that this is on top of that, and it's great that in your school they had that, but in a lot of schools it doesn't seem like that's the case. The reason why the Safe Schools Coalition material was drafted up was because teachers were putting out these concerns, saying, "Look, we want to address these issues that are coming up in our classrooms, and we've got no idea. We've got no materials to have these conversations with students. We don't know how to approach this." And so there was a need identified, and the Safe Schools Coalition materials were developed to meet that need.
Yeah, I didn't think about it that way.
Yeah.
Because I mean, yeah, not every teacher's know how to approach these issues in an appropriate or sensitive or informed manner. And having something like this means that, you know, it puts everyone in the country, I guess, on the same page. You can go from there. I know I don't recall learning much about LGBTI issues when I went through school. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jesse. Did we get anything like this in our schooling?
I don't remember much. I didn't pay attention in those classes.
Maybe the Queensland curriculum is different from the New South Wales one.
It wasn't
Wouldn't
mentioned
surprise me.
really in my education. It was mentioned like that is a thing people do, but it wasn't actually discussed really.
I think that's maybe worth keeping in mind when we're talking about this in the context of Christian approaches to politics too, is that for people like Lyle Shelton and the Christian lobby, they don't want these kinds of things being talked about in school. They don't want kids being educated about diverse sexualities and that sort of thing, because for them it's in opposition to their conservative moral values. And so they would rather shut down all discussion of this kind of thing. And the safe schools to them is particularly egregious, but anything like this is off limits if we keep going down this line of thinking. That's the end game sort of thing for this approach to politics.
Well, it's important to note too that, for example, teaching like LGBTI in schools as acceptable alternatives, you are already going to a foregone conclusion there, one that doesn't necessarily agree with Christianity. So, like you're already teaching one side instead of the other, so to speak. There.
Well, the other side is there's something wrong with these people, and we need to, have a go at them for it, and that's not an okay side. Sorry.
Because I mean, well, the reality is people exist, and we should understand that. Children should understand that. Because LGBTI people aren't going anywhere.
We're
trouble
here.
with
We're
the-
queer. Sorry.
the oh dear. The trouble with the Christian lobby approach is that they don't take that as a foregone conclusion. It's like, okay, these people are out and able to make these calls, but the hope is that, we can go back to a time 50, however many years ago, before these were even political issues. If we can work against this, if we can shut down discussion of it in schools, if we can legislate against same-sex relationships, then we can erase gay and lesbian and transgender voices from the culture. And I believe that's what the Christian lobby want. They don't want this to be a mainstream thing. They want it to be, at best, something that's, talked about behind closed doors, that we can go through life without encountering, without having to think about. That's what people seem to want who are advocating for these political ideas. And so anything short of getting all discussion of LGBT issues out of schools is not going to satisfy them.
I don't remember when you guys had like sex ed and stuff like that. Was it opt-in? Like, did your parents have to sign a slip? Because I'm wondering if they could make this sort of education opt-in, whether the Christian lobby would be happy with that, or whether they want it to be completely abolished.
Well, I mean,
then the
there's a problem with the
LGBTI
opt-in.
lobby wouldn't be happy with that.
Yeah.
But I mean, the problem with that as well, because if you make the program opt-in, if you have uninformed parents, and I don't mean uninformed in that they're prejudiced, I just mean uninformed, like, it's for the layperson, I don't imagine there's a great deal of understanding about trans issues, for example. And if you make the program opt-in, then, perhaps the children most in need of, getting some degree of understanding about these matters, or just even being made aware of them, not necessarily understanding, just aware of them, then, they're the ones most in need of it won't be able to hear it because they won't be in the program.
Okay, then how about an opt-out system as
I mean,
well?
you
So that means
probably have.
The Christian parents that are really concerned about this could go to the effort to opt out their children, but then again, their children might be the ones that need it the most.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's
Fine line.
Same
Yeah.
could be said about Christian education. I'll just throw that out there. I mean, I'm not like a huge proponent of religious education and stuff in schools, but we can have opt-out education for homosexual issues, but not for like the benefits of religious education.
Well, that's the thing, because I mean, I went through. We didn't have any religious education in high school, but in primary school, we did have some RE, but it was all from a Christian perspective. I'd be all for like religious education in schools if it, covered world religions. Comparing and contrasting and getting to speak to people that, they might not get to speak to in everyday life. And I think
is
that
religious education one of the issues on this list?
I'd say it would be.
That would seem to be a pretty important thing. I mean, they've got funding for school chaplaincy programs, but I'm not seeing anything about religious education on here.
Yeah.
And that's actually a topical issue, because I think it was Victoria has gotten rid of all provisions for religious education in their state education laws.
So it's not on the list?
No, I don't think it is.
Doesn't seem to be.
No.
The closest thing is probably the chaplaincy.
Right.
which is a completely different issue, but it's also pretty topical.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, let's
this
discuss.
whole list is pickle.
Yeah, let's discuss the chaplaincy first, and we'll leave religious education for another episode or something. Because
Guys, can I get
time.
really angry? Can I get really angry for a few minutes if we're going to be talking about chaplaincy?
Yeah, do it.
Sure.
I am so cross about the way the chaplaincy debate has been misrepresented by both sides of the debate, but particularly the atheist lobby groups and that sort of thing. I mean, it keeps getting put out there as like, they're going to try and convert kids. They're able to proselytize. They're going to force their religion on kids. I mean, I know a number of school chaplains personally. I had great experiences with school chaplains when I was at school before I was a Christian. They're prohibited by law from trying to push their values onto anybody else. They're prohibited by law from discriminating against anybody else on religious or sexuality or whatever grounds. They are, to all intents and purposes, trained student welfare workers. They have a minimum qualification of something like a Cert 4 or a diploma in youth work. That's like at least a year of study in that, and many will do more. It's like, and the amount of money that they get paid for doing their job is very small compared to the amount of work they'll put in. I mean, they're paid up to a certain point through, or have been paid up to a certain point through the National School Chaplaincy Program funding, but they've had to fundraise for anything over and above that. So a couple of days a week in the school is provided by the government, and anything beyond that is provided by supporters. And so you've got school chaplains who'll be spending a couple of days in one school, another day in another school, and 2 more days in a third school, and providing amazing services and support to students and staff in those schools, fundraising half the money they need to be able to do their job, and just getting in there and helping out and being an amazing asset to the school for nothing but the love of the people that they're working with. And they get ripped apart by these media figures, atheist activists. I mean, I've heard so much ignorant, uninformed criticism of the program, and so many people rejoicing over the fact that this system has had its funding cut with nothing coming in to replace it. I mean, you're going to have hundreds of schools as a result of the chaplaincy funding being cut that have lost a vital student support staff member. And what's going to happen? It's not like there's better trained counsellors coming in to replace them. It's not like the government's investing money in student welfare. They've just cut a good program that was working well and left schools high and dry. So that's my rant. It's a dumb thing. We need to get the funding back, and it's frustrating that none of the major parties seem to be on board with that.
I'm going to sound ignorant. I mean, you raised some good points, but why chaplaincy? Why not just counsellors? Because I know some counsellors, and they seem to struggle just as much as chaplains do in finding jobs in general. But they both seem to provide the same services, but the chaplains, why chaplains? It seems like the Christians want them because of that religious aspect, but why don't we just get counselors?
So there's a couple of things that are at play with that. The first being that when the Howard government brought in the school chaplaincy program, organisations like Scripture Union had already been providing entirely community-funded chaplaincy services to schools. And the government saw these chaplains are doing a great job at looking after students. They're providing great service to the schools. If we were to invest in that, we can continue to grow this service. We can see more students helped, and we can do more to, I guess, regulate the services that are being provided if there's government funding involved. So that was the reason why the government chose to fund the program. For what the advantage of chaplains over counsellors is, I mean, I believe that counsellors should be able to access this funding as well, and I was pretty disappointed a couple of years ago when the decision was made to abolish funding for secular student welfare workers as part of the program. I know there were a few counsellors who were working as secular support workers receiving funding from the NSCP, and they lost their livelihood because of that change that was made. I don't think that was right. I think that funding should have been continued to be made available to both Christian and secular workers. But the advantage of school chaplains specifically is that for students who've got concerns about spiritual issues, that I feel like, I mean, putting myself into the shoes of a student of faith, if you've got concerns about that side of things, you don't want to talk to someone who's a secular counsellor about that necessarily. You want to talk to a chaplain. So a chaplain can provide the same services that a secular worker can, but can also provide spiritual guidance and support and encouragement to students who need that sort of thing. And that's a service that other workers can't provide as well or as authentically, I think. Sorry if that sounds judgmental.
Yeah, so this also comes back to catering to all religions. So I was raised Buddhist. So in high school, I identified as Buddhist. I had lots of friends who were Muslim and Hindi as well, like that. And if we wanted, spiritual guidance, we won't be able to find that within the school. So where would we go to? Like, we might feel discriminated against in ways because, our school has a chaplain, but doesn't even have a counselor. Like, I would personally prefer the counselor over through. Like, does it kind of make sense? Like, it's again with the whole my reasoning way, we shouldn't open up with prayer because it's disregard for every other religion. So.
Well, the interesting thing about it is a lot of schools have both, and if there was to be a Buddhist chaplain, if that's what they're called, or Buddhist advisor, or I don't know what the term would be, then I think they could be welcome to also, serve in the same way. Because chaplains are way cheaper than counsellors. They're often self-funded partially or significantly.
Sorry about the plane.
And in their operation, chaplains aren't allowed to proselytize anyway. So, whatever religion chaplain under their rules can still be helpful to people of other beliefs.
I feel, and I might be completely off the mark in saying this, that even a chaplain of a different religion is going to be more receptive to a student's concerns if they're of a religious nature than someone who's not in a role like that. Also, I believe and correct me if I'm wrong, but under the National School Chaplaincy Program system that was in place, funding was available to any, I guess, religion that wanted to provide a chaplaincy service. So if there was a significant Buddhist community that felt it was important to provide a Buddhist chaplain for a school with a significant Buddhist student population, they could receive funding for that, the same program that provided for Christian chaplains. The qualification was they have to be from a religious group, not that they have to be from a Christian group. So Muslim, I believe there are actually a number of Muslim chaplains who are employed under the same program. Hindu, Buddhist, all of these religions can provide chaplains through the same service, or could until it was scrapped. And that's a good thing that they were able to, and it's a bad thing that they're no longer.
Well, that's one detail that I actually wasn't aware of, and that makes me feel a lot better, because I guess when you mention chaplaincy, you automatically think of Christians. But no, when you can have chaplains of all religions, I think I'd be more receptive to that, I guess. Yeah.
Well, yeah, yeah, like that's the thing. Pillar contact regarding that isn't attack the Christian, so no one can have a chaplain if I can't have one. It's maybe contact the Buddhist community, see if they're willing to put someone forward in that particular school. I think the more people willing to help students with life, the better. So, because I don't know if you know, but a lot of chaplains aren't fully funded by government in any means. A lot of them are self-funded and/or funded by churches giving through people donations. Okay, and the aim of that is actually students' care, people's care. It is not a proselytizing agenda. They pastoral care in the sense of, kids need someone to talk to, isn't going to judge them, and chaplain fills that role in a non-threatening way. That's the idea anyway.
But in practice, would any one school say have access to more than one such individual? Like, I mean, presumably maybe a larger school could, or if you're in a larger community, maybe you could have people come in from outside. But if there's limited funding, could you even if the Graham, I guess, allows for chaplains of different religions, in practice, would you only see, say, one chaplain per school, depending on demographics, perhaps?
I think usually yes. To be honest, I think what you often get is the chaplain is chosen in accordance with whatever the dominant religion in the school community happens to be. So in a school that's got a lot of Christian students, you'll have a Christian chaplain. A school with a lot of Muslim students, you'll have a Muslim chaplain. That's usually what it depends on. And so for students who are in a religious minority within the school, they might not be able to have a chaplain of their religion. They'd be able to have for instance, a religious education class of their religion, but not a chaplain. And that's, I mean, it's just an unfortunate consequence of the funding is limited. But one chaplain is better than no chaplains. Would be the point that I'd make. I don't know if you guys would agree with that, but that's where I end up.
Well, if in the stipulation they, the aims, they can't proselytize their own religion instead of there for pastoral care, in a sense, doesn't really matter which religion they come from in terms of that. Mind you, larger schools, you might find it after a certain student size. This is more getting to the bills and laws and funding and accounting. But after a certain size school, then yeah, it makes sense to get 2 or 3 chaplains or so on. That's like a administrative decision, not necessarily a we call it contentious or religious decision in any way, shape, or form. That's just pure logistics.
All right. Let's move on to another issue. So, let's move on to... Oh, hey, they do actually have RE sort of classes here. Number 8.
Oh, okay.
Support traditional family values and teach our Christian heritage in schools.
Oh, that's not RE. That's talking about not preaching. Although preaching is probably the right word. Teaching a very British-centric view of Australian history. None of this Asian perspectives. None of this Indigenous heritage. It got to focus on the white Christian component of what has made Australia great.
I actually wouldn't have minded learning about a bit more about just the whole lot. So I think I could find it kind of interesting. It's good background to understand where, how we got from where we were to here, and the good, the bad, the ugly, and the really ugly that brought us to where we are now. I mean, obviously age appropriate. I mean, some of it's pretty not very nice.
Yeah.
Let's murder all the babies.
Yeah, that. But honestly, I think yes, teach the Christian values and values in that, and teach a lot else. I think having these are all different things is good to know about, at least in an introductory sense.
I don't see the benefit of teaching that. I mean, if it was from a historical point of view, then maybe. I don't see what, I guess, class that might fit into.
Those studies of society and environment or history, just even Australian history.
That could work, I guess.
I find it interesting in SOS anyway. I actually like objective.
We kind of mostly did in our SOS at least. It was like pretty much all Australian history, and most of it was actually focused on Indigenous and um, like the various Indigenous nations sort of traditions and views on things. At least in our SOS, we actually did very little on the like British history of Australia. But yeah, it should be noted that
Yeah, that
this
was
is
basically.
like the sounding of
I
this
was going to say that's
question
basically.
seems teach uh, teach only what the Christians did rather than teach history as it stands. Also, it's lumped in with traditional family values, which is clearly like um, Christian perspective on sexuality, including and homosexuality. You were saying, Reggie?
I was just going to say, my high school experience of Australian history is basically the same as yours. Focus a lot on the Indigenous peoples, not so much on the British aspects.
All right. So let's discuss these free speech laws 6 and 7. So
do you want to give us some context first?
Yeah.
I only
I guess for the
vaguely,
viewers who...
well, I remember what S18C vaguely is. It's basically, Joel, do you know what it is? You can probably describe it better than I can.
I've got no idea what Section 18C is. I just found
Okay.
these points amusing when I was reading through it.
I
was-
just
I mean,
Googled
It's
it.
basically a, oh, go on, tell us Google's then.
Okay, Racial Discrimination Act 1975, Section 18C. Offensive behavior because of race, color, or national or ethnic origin. 1. It is unlawful for a person to do an act otherwise than in private if the act is reasonably likely in all the circumstances to offend, insult, humiliate, or intimidate another person or a group of people. And B, the act is done because of the race, color, or national or ethnic origin of the person or of some or all of the people in the group.
So basically what they want to do is repeal the laws governing racial vilification. Is that the gist of it?
Well, they want to remove
Uh,
offend from it, which, in
remove
fairness,
the verbal
has been
component, I
very
think it is.
misused. Like, I've only heard about this law through sort of attempts to misuse it. Because, as you can imagine, offend is a very subjective term, and in a culture
The
where
law makes
simply
it clear.
disagreeing with people
Sorry.
can be considered offensive. Like, I don't think anyone succeeded, but you do get situations where people are trying to use this law to arrest people who are promoting views other than their own, pretty much.
So based on the wording of the law, it sounds like the focus of it is very much on the intention of the person committing the act. So it's sort of like if you're trying to offend or insult someone, and you're doing the offensive behavior on racial grounds, then that's what the problem is. And I mean, obviously, people can argue over what their intent was or what it wasn't, but it doesn't sound like it's a bad thing. I feel like it's a greater danger to not have that in the law than to have it. Now, what do you guys reckon?
It's an interesting one because, like, everyone is like, okay, yeah, don't be mean to people, please. But then there's also, okay, well, how do you actually prove in a court of law that what's actually happened? So, yeah, it, I can see how that law can be misused. If you really want that law to annoy someone and misuse it, you can misuse it. I don't know if the solution is removing it, like they're suggesting, like remove that. I don't know if that's the best way around it, but I can see kind of why. Uh, it's a tough one because, there's some pretty bad slander that happens, and there's also the false accusation of slander, which is arguably just as bad. It's not a simple one. I don't know if the option 7 there to amend and remove that is the best way though.
I mean, because what are the do you know the context for them like why this is number 7 on the list? Like why this is particularly an issue for them? Because I mean, I can
This is my
understand
guess.
if you take it, like you can obviously take it back to like the core issue and say it's freedom of speech. People should be able to say and do anything. Well, sorry, say and do anything they want. So long as it doesn't affect another person.
I think that's the ground there. Like, no, I'm speculating here, so umbrella of I'm speculating. But let's say that, I personally don't agree with, let's say, just pick an example of, gay marriage, okay? And then someone says, I'm offended by that, then you can get prosecuted and again, bam, because they're offended by it.
And
This
that is the
about racial
situation that's been
distinction.
seen in. It was either that or abortion that I was reading the article on about where it was
It
trying
could
to
be
be
abortion,
misused.
whatever it is.
But I mean, this is exclusively racial discrimination. This act.
Is it?
The thing is about racial discrimination is that it's said with malicious intent, and that's what people get confused about when they say they're offended. Like, or you say something, and as long as it's hard to explain, like you can say something, and some person who doesn't really understand offense might say they're offended, but like the important thing is saying something with that malicious intent of hurting someone or humiliating someone. That's a bad thing, and that's what should be stopped by law. That's why they have this, to basically stop you from insulting or offending anyone because of racial grounds. I'm really bad at explaining this, but people like who are, I understand this culture of everyone possibly being offended, but like, yeah, you got to remember that it's only bad if someone says it with a malicious intent. Like if it's like the Cards Against Humanity card, which is like fun-loving Aussie racism. Like you might have like a stupid racist joke, but it might just be based on the stereotype, but it's not actually malicious. It depends on the context of who you're with. Does it make any sense? Am I making any sense?
It does, and I mean, I think the point that the main point of this act is not the offend and insult. Like the reason it exists is, probably more for the humiliate and intimidate due to on racial grounds. But it's again, the point was raised that it's this stuff is subjective, and the line between intimidation and being insulted or being offended at times might be quite thin. But yeah, it's like I can understand why you would have issue with like why people would see issue with this from a free speech perspective, but I think on the whole what the act is trying to do, I don't think it's a bad thing.
Yeah, no.
I don't think it's a bad thing either. It should like stay as it is.
Yeah, and like I'm also in favor of it staying as it is, because I mean, yes, the law can be misused, but so can nearly any law. What's worse is not having the law, so that should someone commit the offense that you're trying to prevent, your legal system is left powerless because without a law they can't do anything. So the intent of laws isn't just, oh, they broke this law, therefore they get the prescribed punishment. It's therefore we can charge them and have a group of people decide whether they really are guilty of doing something wrong, rather than we have to stand back and do nothing because there is no law against this sort of thing. And so from
I
that
think if
perspective,
that
I'm pretty in favor of it.
Yeah.
I
It's
think
good.
if that's used in conjunction with benefit of the doubt, let's say it's completely a verbal, and there's absolutely no recording and no real way of proving it, that it goes to benefit of the doubt, not guilty. Then I think leave it as it is. That law is good to leave as it is. If you have a way of benefit of the doubt if unproven. I think which is pretty much most things really.
That's what
Anyway,
Yeah.
guilty,
that's kind of how it
innocent
works.
before guilty is. So
How
our
everything
legal
works
system works
usually.
like that by default on anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think just keep it.
Something another friend raised about this point is how bad this looks for us as Christians. I mean, even if this is a
Yeah.
law that's being misused, we're basically saying, no, we want to be able to offend and insult people. Like, if you are not,
Yeah,
On
I mean
racial grounds.
yeah, if you're not,
that's why you come.
if you don't understand the context of this law having been misused at times, it does look very bad. It's like, okay, so we
I mean,
Christians
that's
are
why you
entirely
come at it
about
from a
offending
free
and
speech perspective.
insulting like other races, because Christianity is a
Yeah.
race.
Both of the points about uh, changing things in defense of free speech or whatever, for Christians to be campaigning in favor of that, it makes it look like we want the opportunity to do more to vilify, gay people or Muslim people or whoever it happens to be. We're not happy with the freedom. We want to be horrible, basically. We want the freedom to be awful. That's not a good look,
Yeah. And I
even
think
if it is
No.
a reflection of where some people are at.
like the real intent, I think, is we want to protect our ability to actually say things against people's against like beliefs and practices we don't agree with, because
But even that is questionable, right? Like, what's the biblical basis for doing that?
well, we want to call people to repent.
Yeah, but it's not our job to judge people who aren't already
Yeah, I know,
subscribing to a
but when
Christian way of life. And if they are already subscribing to a Christian way of life, then they're not going to have a problem with being called to account. So
I mean
where
we'll get into this
comes the
more when we
problem?
discuss the like the other topic I got planned. About basically discussing this entire issue where it's not even just Christians, it's any non-mainstream view, especially conservative views, are under increasing attack under the pretense of offending human rights, even when they don't necessarily. But I'll just leave that there, and we'll approach that in a couple of weeks when we can give a bit more background and context to that, because we're already fairly over time.
Hmm.
Right, so what was the other free speech one actually? Oh, the sexuality and gender identity ones.
What does
Uh,
We
number
haven't covered
15
that.
mean?
See, that's the one I don't get, because I mean,
Gender selected.
do we really
Oh,
fund abortion based on gender? Like, is that a thing Australia does? Because if so, we definitely should change that.
What,
I
what
mean,
does
if
it
we,
mean, gender selected?
So
as
if you
in,
find out that your baby is going to be a boy and you want a girl, you kill your baby. If you find out your
Oh,
baby is going to be a girl and you want a boy, you kill your baby.
people do that?
Yeah.
yeah.
No.
but I mean, naively, I might expect that this isn't like it's not actually written into law, like saying that it's explicitly written that yes, you can get Medicare funding to perform gender-selected abortion. It's probably more that people can intentionally or not use knowledge
Yeah.
and then later have an abortion.
Which makes
And
it difficult to regulate.
yeah, I don't know how would you regulate that without, you know, uh,
I'll,
putting,
I'll, I'll
the
tell you
women
how they.
involved into, under very, very harsh and unnecessary scrutiny based on what
I'll,
they may or may not know.
I can tell you how the people putting forward this idea want to regulate it. Ban abortion, right? Because then you don't have to worry about these tricky little ethical grey areas. It's all wrong. You can't do it. That's the response they want to take. And so the idea of this is it paves the way for that.
Why is that yeah, why is the issue here then opposed gender selected option? I mean, I
Because
suppose
it's more
it can be a stepping
acceptable.
stone, but
Yes, yeah.
I mean, because some of these things on here are because you would have Christians and non-Christians agreeing that, you know, if they're, you know, of the pro-life viewpoint, that maybe we should abortion entirely, and that people already have these views, so it seems, I mean, I guess it's a wedge, like a foot in the door legally. If you can get this passed, then it's more likely to be able to do more stuff rather than just do it all at once.
And it's more palatable initially. Like you've got a lot of people who take a pro-life leaning viewpoint who aren't in favor of a blanket ban of abortion. But if you can start to restrict on things and get the foot in the door, like you're saying, then that can lead to more dramatic changes down the track.
And this will be exactly like the US situation where, you know, there's just so many restrictions piled on that whilst technically abortion is legal in, you know, some states,
it's just impossible.
It's impossible, like with, you know, the mandatory waiting periods, or the fact that you might have to, there's only one abortion clinic in your state, and you might have to, you know, drive many hours, then wait, and then see a doctor, and then wait. Like, you've got a mandatory waiting period, and then, you know, only then you can do it, which of course impacts, I guess, lower income people with, you know, less means, like this, just to support themselves through these decisions.
The alternative affects unborn babies, but let's leave abortion again for a whole topic.
Discussion.
Yeah.
We will have differing views here.
Well, we definitely do. But what I would guess is it's probably more this is an issue that has come up at some point and so there's statements by parties on it, and it's on people's minds to be put on this list rather than just a foot in the door approach. Because, like, I think if they really wanted, they would just say oppose abortion, but I don't think I don't think you'd get any ticks from that, really. Or maybe you wouldn't have statements on that. So it's more likely this is just something that they actually had information and a comment on.
Well,
maybe I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, but
I think people realize nowadays the blanket, let's just ban abortion, realize, medical community goes, you do realize that's a valid medical diagnosis for a bunch of things, right? Just, guys, can we not mess around with just a blanket rule on something? Okay, bye.
Well, people don't generally mean that. They mean laws like a lot of Europe has, where it's
I know what you mean.
Only in medical reasons can you have an abortion.
Yeah, well, that's getting into it. But yeah, essentially.
But yeah, again, another time.
No, but God gave you those medical reasons, so it's still not valid. That's.
Oh dear.
So, what do we think about? Does anyone actually know anything much about presumption of equal parenting after divorce? Like number 11, I'm talking about.
Oh.
Help children support presumption of equal parenting after divorce.
I think that's the father's rights things. I think at the moment, isn't it slightly mother leaning? That's the thing that they're trying to get fixed, because it's kind of telling mothers to have a slight advantage. I thought is that the thing it's talking about?
I think it might.
I can only imagine it is.
I've heard it's currently, like, I don't know anything about this issue, but I did chat with some other people who, what they think it's against, and I'm not sure if this is our current laws or not, is by default the mother gets sole parenting after a divorce, and anything else has to be negotiated. So this is supporting for equal parenting, so I guess shared parenting after divorce as the default rather than mother takes all. Which, I mean, I don't know enough to comment. I don't know statistics and whether mother takes all is generally better, or how difficult the legal proceedings are to actually get parenting as a father. But also,
I kind of like
is that a really bad default?
The equal thing view. I think it's not a great one because
I mean the equal one.
Well, yeah. Oh, I think equal's good. It's better because like if otherwise those just don't get a fair go. They have to like basically still go to the league process just to get to equal, let alone so they start they start with a handicap, have to fight back to get to equal.
As a fair point, though,
Which
fathers are
kind of
often far more likely to be problems.
so yeah, presumption. Therefore, correlation equals causation. Guilty by genetics. Got it. I think that's kind of why they want to bring it back to equal is if you're a Y chromosome, you're guilty of being bad father. Like, oh, cool. Um,
I mean, there's a
which
lot of
Plenty of bad
cultural.
mothers out there as well.
yeah,
I
I
like
think
this equal parenting thing.
statistically you're right in that. Yes, okay. Statistically, probably more fathers have the issues that are less likely to make them suitable parents, but I think you let it go both ways.
I mean, as I was saying, I think there's a lot of cultural issues here as well, in that, just uh, women are women in Western culture, in Australian culture, in many respects, are seen as more nurturing, as motherly. Like the term motherly has a different connotation in some respects to the word fatherly, and so the culture influences these decisions, regardless of whether the actual actions of each party in each individual case.
All right. Next issue.
The refugees, but they have a few points
They
about
are
those.
not on the list. We will get to that. Don't worry. That is one of my main problems with this list. I mean, there's two about refugees, but we'll see. They are not really about refugees.
Yeah. We want to stop the boats. We want
Yeah.
only Christians.
So let's discuss internet filters. Um, do we know much about drug harm prevention, abstinence-based programs? Like, I know vaguely what it's about. It's talking about we want more programs about not just weaning people onto methadone rather than cocaine, for example, and then just pretty much leaving them there forever. And we want more on things that try and stop drugs altogether. That's the gist of it, I think. And
I mean, for an issue like this, it'd be useful to have some statistics on, say, the efficacy of one program versus the other.
Yeah.
I don't really want to speculate here.
A lot of the trouble comes on to faults of people again, because I mean, using methadone to wean someone off, I don't even know if it's cocaine, but off certain drugs is quite valid. But then you've got plenty of doctors or people who will just never go to not taking methadone again, and they just live on methadone instead of cocaine for the rest of their life. And I think this point is more to try and stop that. So again, you could take that too far and get rid of useful things such as needle exchanges or methadone altogether. And those
Right,
can go too far where you're not making drugs a problem at all.
I think that's a really good distinction. There is okay. Do we try to go jump straight to end game, or do we go okay rather than stay at the intermediate? Would then take it another step. I think there's some people in the camp of this only way to deal with any action is cold turkey. That's the only way to deal with everything. It's like, well, for some it works, and some it's great. Some not so much. Because physiology is complicated. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's not simple. We can't just blanket state biochemistry and human behaviors and stuff. It's really complicated stuff. And sometimes an intermediate phase or step, supplement, whatever it is good. Or is at least more helpful than a blanket cold turkey.
I have a pretty radical point of view on drugs. That's
Oh yeah.
that's because of Portugal did 14 years ago, which was legalize any kind of drug, cocaine, heroin, whatever, because they were battling like just a drug war they were losing. So they just legalized all drugs, and that fixed the problems because gangs had no way to, I guess, control the people they had. They put all the money from fighting the drugs into rehab. So what that did was make drugs seem less appealing, and also gave everyone the opportunity to take them safely or to seek rehab easily. So it's pretty radical, and it doesn't really fit in with this whole discussion. That's a whole different discussion.
Was that actually Portugal? I thought that was like Paraguay.
No, that was
No, it's
Portugal.
Portugal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good
Those
system. I
Netherlands
like
do.
it.
I mean,
Anyway,
it works. I will give it that. Like,
also,
it's probably...
atrophy is to reduce your population enough.
Well, the thing is, it basically strips the gangs that tear apart large parts of the world fueled by drug money of their power. And you save a lot of money that you can then pour into welfare programs. And that's its real benefit. Well, I don't... Like, it's not a great legal precedent to say, let's legalize all drugs, but at the same time, it does less harm than
It
the
worked.
alternative. Yeah. So it's a difficult one. But anyway, again, another issue.
Not that difficult. Let's go to Portugal and do heroin.
Yeah.
In a safe environment, and they'll give you pamphlets beforehand, and yeah.
That said, it
This
doesn't always
episode
fix
just
the
seems to be
issue.
about
I mean, opium in China had the exact opposite effect.
True.
And they actually have done a really good job of eradicating... Like, they've got less drug use than elsewhere, let's put it that way. But okay, internet
But that
filters.
doesn't really fit in with with this increasing drug harm prevention and abstinence programs.
it's funny because each of these topics have been its own episode,
I know.
and some of them likely will be. We're just doing the rapid fire overview. Like, what's this? We got 21 topics. We're set for the next half year, Jesse.
Yeah. I was probably a tad
And half the point
optimistic.
of this episode was that those topics were like limited in terms of like they don't talk about enough. So many
Yeah.
options.
I mean, even the equal, like, parenting one, we could easily have strayed there into gender roles and various other things.
Oh gosh.
So,
Let's not though.
yeah, I know. So internet filters, I think they're kind of dumb because they give Australia even worse internet than we already have, and if someone
Yeah.
really wants to find a way around
You
it,
can't
it's
filter
pretty
everything.
easy.
Wait, which one's internet filters?
You got a couple down on porn there, and
Oh.
one including ISP filters.
I mean, I find it really interesting. Not that I'm necessarily saying that it's a bad idea to restrict people's access to this kind of stuff, but at the same time, like the points about we've got to protect free speech by allowing us to insult the bloody Muslims, and then on the other hand, you're saying, but you can't watch, dirty movies in the privacy of your own house. That's off limits. It's slightly, inconsistent. I don't know.
I mean,
Are you for censorship or against censorship, or just when it like fits comfortably with your personal views?
So, I mean, this raises another issue in that, you're worried about the effect that, sexual content and pornography will have on children. Because I'm sure a lot of people, they don't get very good, they don't hear much in the way of, say, sexual education, and they learn everything from porn, which, is fake in many respects.
That's
Yeah.
something I really hate because you get unrealistic expectations of like female and male like what their bodies should look like and what
The role of
sex
the
should
pizza
be like.
delivery guys in society.
Yeah. The plumber. Or I don't know how porn like addresses concerns about consent. That's another thing as well, maybe. But the main thing I'm annoyed at is like the presentation of, because growing up, and you see it today, like girls want to look like porn stars. Basically, they wax everything because that's what you see in porn, and that's what men expect women to look like as well. And like, I'm not cool with it.
It's worse than that though, in that it's also normalizing sexual practice. Like, I've read several articles now on how, especially high school students, because everyone's kind of awkward at that stage, and the men are taking their cues from porn, and the women don't want to disappoint their boyfriends, so you're ending up with all these girls being forced into things like threesomes and other sexual acts that they've seen in porn that everyone's assumed is normal now, and then feeling absolutely terrible afterwards and hating themselves. Like, this is a really big upcoming issue that's been in quite a lot of in the news a fair bit.
Well, I mean, this topic in particular, we could go so many places with this, because I mentioned, and we just discussed the sexual education aspect of it and unrealistic expectations. It also has we could also take it to the topic of pornography as an industry and sex workers and perspectives on that, because they're proposing a ban on it. The government's saying that this is not okay as an industry, as a form of work, as a livelihood. There's just so many, and of course there's also technical issues with, like, Australia doesn't have that great internet to begin with, and if we want to go putting, scanning everything that's through, and then you're going to have people continually updating that and patching holes in it, because people will find ways around it. Like, this could go so many places. Like, this is just a web that we could discuss so many other issues from.
In another episode.
Yeah.
So
we're taking notes.
Yeah.
Really
We've got a checklist for the next 20 issues.
Though, yeah.
Yeah, this is a good one.
Yeah, I would have thoughts on this as well.
It's probably one of those we want to find another girl for, though. So yeah, we have a long list. So viewers, we have a long list of topics that we want to discuss, but that we want preferably more than one girl. Because, like, we got Reggie now, which is great, but we're also lacking a female Christian perspective for some of the issues, which I would also like to have. So those are sort of on the when I can convince someone else to be guest speaker for that day, we'll do that issue.
You make it sound like we're a horrible group of people, and it's a horrible chore for them to come and join us, Jesse.
We just have to beg everyone to come on the show. Like,
yeah, you're not really selling us.
Well, that's how it worked out. It's like, hey, join our show. Yeah, cool, let's do it. Then show up for like, oh, actually I can't. And then they just sit on our page forever. But, alright, mess up and lose their episode. Sorry, Sarah. But anyway.
Well done.
How about we discuss the irony of how the Greens have the most red, which is ironic because they're green and not red.
They could be covered in ice.
Yeah. It's like the Greenland thing. They're actually lying. They're actually really terrible.
I mean, I do appreciate the irony of the last one. Support greater care for the environment. Greens, give him a tick. Come on, go give him one. Go give him one. Go for the environment. Come on. Yeah.
Like, that sort of disappoints me even more that made the list, and so many other things didn't. I mean, I'm not against caring for the environment. I think that's great that that's there, and that even Christians are starting to care about that now. But that makes the list, and as we'll see in a minute, refugees don't really. The care for the poor and single parents and so forth don't. And I mean, we'll get into this in closing thoughts. But yeah,
They mention in the introduction to the checklist, though, that they're not talking about humanitarian and social justice issues because all the parties have the same position, which is complete rubbish because the Liberals want to gut everything and Labor wants to gut like 90% of stuff, and probably a bunch of these Nationals just, farmers are the only people who get welfare. Like,
Source, they don't. End quote.
yeah. Says the farmer's son for context.
yeah.
Yeah, so
That's actually there's an episode in that actually, but anyway.
But it's
sure.
like in the intro they say our aim is to deal with the moral and ethical issues that are here rarely, if ever, discussed publicly
I
in
think
an
the
election campaign.
plebiscite on marriages comes up every few, 3 minutes, 4 minute cycles.
And
Yep,
how long
yep.
has stopping the boats been, a slogan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Long
Now,
time.
see, they've got
Let's
their own spin on it, though. Stop the
Yep,
deaths
let's
of
get into
refugees
this.
at sea. Put them in prison. Keep kids in prison. That's the thing that gets me, is that their big issue with refugees is not, hey, there are children who have been in prison for the last 3 years who are like drinking bleach because killing themselves at like age 12 is a more desirable prospect than staying locked up in Australian immigration jail. Like,
Which isn't even in Australia necessarily.
yeah, it is completely messed up the way that we're treating these people, and the Christian response is let's keep like putting them in prison, and we'll say that we're saving lives by doing that.
Oh, but if they're Christian, we'll let them in.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
That's ridiculous. Even then, I don't think they let them through. Actually, no, sorry. I'm mixing things up.
If they
Yeah,
came
actually, a lot
illegally,
of the
no.
Sri
But they're
Lankan-
talking about give in the legal orderly queues, which I've heard is somewhat of a myth anyway. Legal methods are much more
Yeah,
complex than
yeah.
that. But
Oh no,
I don't have
the
the stats
legal
on that
queue
to
for
talk about
escape
it too
and
much.
war.
But for the legal queue to get into Australia, let's give the priority to the Christians in that, because presumably they fit with our culture more, because being white means you're Christian, right? And or Australian, I
Oh
should
dear.
say. And also the somewhat legitimate concern of they often face, at least from Arabic countries, they face greater persecution. But that also
I was
negates
actually
the
going to
others that
say,
don't, such as the Yazidis and so forth, or Yazidis.
a side note I was going to mention was, I think quite a few of the Sri Lankan refugees that came to Australia were probably Christian, because a lot of the Tamil population in the north are Catholics, and they were part of the large population that were trying to flee the civil war in Sri Lanka to come to Australia, and a lot of them were turned back and sent back to Sri Lanka. So, I don't know. Maybe even if they could, that they were Christians, would they be allowed into Australia, or would it be because like, oh, they're brown? Probably not. I'm Sri Lankan, by the way.
Yeah. The whole idea of let's impose a religious test on you before you can come into the country. It not only does it seem completely counter to everything that Australia, in my mind, has always kind of stood for, but like, I mean, how do you get someone to prove that they're a Christian? What's to stop someone who's a Muslim saying, actually, I'm a Christian, if that'll get me to, I mean, if it means that I don't get shot by someone, I'll tell someone I'm whatever religion they want me to tell them I am.
Yeah.
Like,
That isn't
I just don't
necessarily.
understand.
Yeah, it's probably a pointless contradiction of your point, but often if you're not comfortable of telling someone you're whatever religion you want to not be shot, that's often when you are the ones who have to flee the country because you don't want to recant your religious beliefs simply to save your life.
Yeah.
But anyway, continue. No, we have surprisingly little to say on this. I thought this would be like our big topic. I guess because we're
I
all
mean,
in
we've
agreement.
also
yeah, yeah.
we've already had a bit of a
Consensus just seems to
discussion on
be it's
refugees, though.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
We need to not do that.
Because I mean, what's this proposing that you get two claimants, two people claiming refugee status and seeking asylum at the same time, and say they both say my entire family was killed, and one of them is a Muslim and one of them's a Christian, but we just say, oh, your reason isn't good enough, Mr. Muslim. We're going to invite Mr. Christian in instead.
I think it's more because you got like yearly it's probably not yearly but it's like we've got intake quotas for a certain amount at certain times, and the idea is Mr. Christian, Mr. Muslim will get in at some day if they're genuine refugees, but we will take Mr. Christian first, and if lots of Mr. Christians show up, then Mr. Muslim is going to be waiting a very long time because little Mr. Christian always gets first.
That doesn't sound biblical. Just putting it out there.
And that's the issue with this whole thing. Like, at first I thought, wow, lots of this stuff is not really on point. Then I thought, oh, at least they got refugees there. Then I read the refugees and thought, no, this is just a pretty way of saying stop the boats.
Yeah.
Let's prevent
Hang
the
on a
deaths at
minute.
sea by by keeping our current laws in place to keep people away from Australia. And let's make sure that if we are putting people in, we don't want any of them Muslims who are all terrorists and causing all these problems. Let's make sure it's the Christians first. And it's like,
Because I mean, if you read, sorry, I was just going to say, if you read down lower beneath the table, for point 20, where it says humanitarian refugees give priority for persecuted Christian minorities, it goes into more detail and it says persecuted Christians, especially in Muslim majority countries such as Nigeria, West Papua, and the Middle East, need our support. The Christian/conservative parties support giving priority to Christians. The coalition promised to give preference to persecuted Christian minorities regarding Syrian refugees. And it just seems to be, couching the othering of non-Christians in the way that you say, oh, the Christians are persecuted, which I'm not denying in Muslim majority countries, but it doesn't speak for anyone else. It just says they're persecuted, and we should give priority to that.
all right, well, let's go to closing thoughts, unless someone else has more to say on this. Cool. So yeah, I'll go first. So my major disappointment with this was so much did not make the list. I mean, for one,
They didn't
actual
mention
care.
homelessness or
Yeah, like for one, actual care for refugees. I mean, where are these people who will get shot in their home countries going to go? Who's going to look after them? And then even just our own care, like where's the care for homeless or where's social
major
services and
parties'
stuff?
political positions are very similar. They're very similar, Jesse. Don't you understand?
Yeah.
You don't need to know how they stand because they're all the same. You vote for the
Yeah.
Liberals or the Greens, they'll do the same things for homeless people.
I mean, they all support state housing programs and what's that thing called? Centrelink. So that's the same position, right? 'Cause-
Yeah.
yeah. And from my perspective here, the church I go to is in a pretty downtrodden area of the town I live in, and we have a lot of social workers there, including some pretty high up in their organizations, like leaders of their organization. And so, like, I sort of hear firsthand just how much difference these parties have on these issues and how much funding they get and how that affects what they can do, the different policies that are put on for different things. But none of that makes these lists. It's got preserving our state prayer from our secular government, but it doesn't have increasing support for women's shelters. It doesn't have ensuring that it doesn't have anything about, like, I can't think of anything specific, but it doesn't have anything about helping funding for the homeless, for state housing, for example, or for programs to help educate low-skilled workers. It's got nothing about that. It's got nothing to help, like to put it biblically, it's got nothing about the widows and the orphans to help them out. It's all about
The other thing you need to
helping
keep in
us
mind,
Pharisees.
The other thing you need to keep in mind, though, is that they're part of the idea with this is to showcase how comprehensively the religious parties' agendas check all the important Christian values boxes. And so if the Christian Democrats or the DLP or Family First or Rise Up Australia, if they don't have strong policies for addressing homelessness and don't see homelessness as a big deal, then like the Greens would get a tick and the Christian Democrats wouldn't, and then people might think, oh, the Greens are more moral than the Christian party, and we couldn't have that. So so we can't have these issues that the left-wing parties do better on.
I realized we didn't discuss one point, which is point number 9, talking about funding for schools.
Oh, we didn't, did we?
Yeah. So, support funding for Christian and private schools. Personally, I don't think private schools should get much funding at all, if any. I think the government should be funding public schools only. I went to a public school. I really liked it. It helped families that were struggling to get their kids through. It put everyone on equal footing. That's just my personal opinion. I don't know if you guys went to private schools and...
I was like homeschooled, so but I also spent a couple of years in a private school and a couple of years in a public school, so I've seen the whole works of things. Yeah, private schools like whinge heaps about the fact that they don't get enough money, but they get plenty of money. I've seen the statistics.
Yeah, I'm with Reggie. I think the state should only fund the state schools. Those schools purposely run so that people who can't afford an education for their kids otherwise could afford an education and a good education. And I think, like, this is just what my friend told me about how it works, is the government doesn't specifically fund private schools of any sort. It just, the government puts out grants that any school, including private schools, can go for. And private schools put a lot of time and money into making sure they get a lot of these grants. So they're basically getting pretty substantial funding and directly denying it to public schools. Which, again, I think that sort of government funding should only go for public schools.
I mean, I think it's just in the name, public versus private schools. Where should the public money go?
Private schools.
Ding, 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 ding.
It's what we do with our companies, so... Right, so what are some other people's closing thoughts?
Anything about...
Oh, go on, Richie.
Sorry. I was going to say, talking about, like, where the government puts their money or where the government's not taking money from, like, it didn't mention points about, I guess, religious institutions being tax-free or something about taxes of the sort. I feel like religious, churches or mosques or anything, if they earn enough money, they should pay tax on that. That's my opinion.
To be fair, a good, like, church or mosque or anything, its money is, most of it is, or at least a good portion of it is going out into charity work. making it mostly like it makes
Well,
it
yeah,
pretty similar to a
money
charity organization in that it makes enough to sustain itself and then the rest it puts out. And so the government wants to encourage that so they don't tax it. I think is the intent behind those
Yeah, no,
laws.
that's
And I mean, there's
ideally
churches that
how it
definitely
should
don't
work.
do that, but
Yeah.
and I mean, coming from a church in a very low income area with lots of social issues that we try and help address, we do not make much money. If we didn't have a big church funding us, we just couldn't exist. And
Well, no, that's
having
why
added
charities
taxes
they're
on top
funding.
of that, it could be really bad for some churches that need it.
Yeah.
Super quick
Yeah.
side note. I'm very glad that as part of the big church involved with the little church that we do support people actually in serious need. And I think that's really good and should be more a priority even.
I guess my view is
Side note.
tainted because of mega churches like Hillsong and stuff like that. But that's why charities make their finances transparent. Like you can go
Yeah.
online and find out how Oxfam spends their money or how Fred Hollows spends their money exactly. So that is a fine line because I do support like churches and any other religious organization that do actually help people, but then like I said, a lot of atheist views are tainted by like mega churches and stuff like that. Like why do these things, how are these allowed to exist?
Well,
I
you
mean,
see,
like from a
they
Christian
need a
point of view,
private
we get
jet.
cross about that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is probably one of those other topics tonight that could become fleshed out into its own
topic.
episode.
Mm.
Like, I think this list should just be like what we're going to discuss in the
It's not
future.
a table of contents. There's a table of contents?
Yeah. Well, this has been good actually because I have been finding it hard to get ideas for the past few weeks. So. Or like ideas that don't require a woman, two women.
Yeah, like a lot of these.
Wow. Shots fired, Jesse.
Well, I mean, I explained my
The
reasoning
sexism is
before.
strong tonight.
It's to get a
Equality, man,
female
equality.
Christian perspective as well. Because, I mean,
Well, I
the
mean, it's
Christian
just more
perspective
to-
is kind of the focus of our show. Like, I do want all the perspectives, but, I mean, it's in our name. We're Theologaming.
It's more just about having a diverse range of views here, because some of these topics tonight, we've been like, yeah, that's unreasonable. And everyone nods their heads. And it's like, well, do we have anything else to discuss about this?
Yeah.
Yeah, we need
Whereas-
some more Nazis on the show, right? Like that's problem we identified from the outset that we've done nothing about.
Because, I mean, we discussed one of our earlier episodes when we first started was we discussed, terrorism, and that had, a section where we were discussing, Islam. Yet, at the time, the podcast was a bunch of white Christians and an atheist.
Yeah.
Which, like, I think that discussion, would have been better served had we had, a wider range of views on that topic. And so the same goes for any topic, topics that involve women, it shouldn't just be a bunch of white men discussing the issues. But the benefit of some of these topics that we've discussed tonight, and, that have potential to be expanded, not all of them are like that. Some of them, for example, like if we were to turn the discussion for like the funding of private and Christian schools into a whole episode, that's something anybody can discuss. Or, what were we just discussing? Were we just discussing the school one?
The taxes?
The taxes. Like, that's something that any of us can discuss. Doesn't really matter. But there are some that, would benefit from a certain additional perspective that some of us lack.
I still think, I think it's okay to discuss things you aren't a part of, for example. Like, for the Muslim one, I was pretty comfortable with doing that because there's so much, like it's out there, it's being discussed by plenty of people who aren't Muslims, by plenty of Muslims who other Muslims don't agree with, for example, and other things like that. And I mean, I at least I've done research into Islam. I've got a Quran, stuff like that. I'm not a Muslim, but I know more about it than a lot of the people saying things. So sometimes you have to speak even if you don't have all the answers or the perspective, I think. But I mean,
Sure, I mean,
it's
it's
pretty
not
easy to
about
get a
like
Muslim
us.
as opposed to get a woman as opposed to a Muslim.
Yeah, I mean, it's less
I
about
say it's
us,
pretty
you know,
easy to
not
get a woman,
speaking
and
about these.
it hasn't happened. But anyway,
I was wondering where the tonight's reference to Jesse's singleness would come from.
not what I meant, but
But yeah,
that is
it's
also a problem. So, ladies,
anyway.
I run an internet show.
And I rock up as well. Anyway.
dear.
Oh, that was a nice jovial.
Suddenly your motivation becomes incredibly clear.
Anyway, Jesse's mobile phone number and social media details will be in the description below this video. If you'd like to get into contact with him, just go there. He's really great to chat to. I hear his serious voice is the same as his joking voice.
That was and sarcasm. Dry sarcasm.
But yeah, just to wrap up what I was saying before, it's less about not discussing these issues and more about not speaking over voices that aren't heard as often, which is, I think, an important distinction. Like, it's not that we shouldn't be able to discuss these issues because, you know, should, but it's we shouldn't claim authority on such issues over those that are more familiar with them or more affected by them.
Agreed. Right, so back to the topic at
And I guess
hand.
just yeah, I'll just say my final. I think I will probably echo what most people have said in that these issues, like it says that our aim is to deal with the moral and ethical issues that are rarely, if ever, discussed publicly. But by bringing these issues to the forefront, it makes like any election about these issues when there is, you know, so much more that's, you know, bigger picture stuff that affects the country, that affects international relations, that affects the people in our country, the underrepresented, the disadvantaged, that's just lost in the noise of, you know, hot button issues. And I think that does a disservice to, I guess, the democratic process. Not that these voices being heard is, you know, undemocratic. It's just that it masks issues that are important.
And that are
Just
often
hides them.
completely forgotten, like widows, orphans, the poor, voices that we don't hear from, or that aren't discussed.
Yes.
I mean, there's a reason they're called the invisible.
But anyway, those are my thoughts on the matter.
Cool discussion. Lots of interesting perspectives.
I mean, for my sort of closing thoughts, I mean, I'm pretty cynical about politics in general, and I've always been pretty cynical about so-called Christian politics in particular. And so, if nothing else, this has reinforced that cynicism. So I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. But yeah, I'm not voting for the Christian Democrats, and I don't think you should either. That's my closing idea.
Anything to add, Jacob?
Yeah, I think I closing thoughts on this would be interesting list. Um, Pros of this list, it promoted discussion on on issues, not necessarily only the issues that are presented. I mean, there's some meta ones with the list itself, but I think the fact that I actually provoke discussion is good. Um, and yeah, I would hope people don't rely on a list to vote for them, and would use a list to simply raise questions and to task themselves and to discuss. So my advice to everyone is just blindly carbon copy something on first glance. Think about it, have a look, discuss, and make a well-informed decision on whatever you decide. That's it.
Alrighty. And thanks everyone for watching. And yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the battle that's going on. These replays have all been broken anyway. If you've played Total War, you would have noticed that. But I won. Spoiler. See you all next week.
Yeah.
Catch you all
Yeah.
later.
See ya.
That awkward moment when you're stuck between screens and can't stop the recording.